on I24 News. President Trump is still refusing to sign legislation to fund the government without funding for his border wall. And with the government shutdown now heading into day 18, White House officials are now considering going around Congress to fund the wall by declaring a national emergency.
We're looking at a national emergency because we have a national emergency. Just read the papers.
In the wake of President Trump declaring victory against ISIS in Syria, National Security Advisor John Bolton is now meeting with U.S. allies in the Middle East. And he's softening the administration's message about a U.S. troop withdrawal.
We're going to be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated.
And American actor Kevin Spacey spent part of this day in a Massachusetts courtroom where he denied charges that he sexually assaulted an 18-year-old man.
From the I24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Tal Heinrich.
This was day 17 in the U.S. government shutdown over President Trump's demands for a southern border wall, and the president is now talking openly about taking unusual measures to get the wall funding.
White House officials met with congressional aides over the weekend, but both sides say there has been no progress. And now the president is saying he may resort to calling a national emergency to fund the border wall.
We're going to have more on that story later in the broadcast, but first, the Trump administration is now slowing down the timeline for a U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria. During a visit to next-door Israel, National Security Advisor John Bolton said that the United States would not leave Syria until the threat from Islamic State was taken care of.
The president initially declared victory over ISIS and said the troops would be coming home immediately, but by all accounts, that was changed. I24 News' Derek Dennis reports.
President Trump's about-face on U.S. troop withdrawal in Syria.
And we won't be finally pulled out until ISIS is gone.
Less than a month after the president announced he was immediately pulling all 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria, claiming the defeat of ISIS.
So our boys, our young women, our men, they're all coming back, and they're coming back now. We won, and that's the way we want it.
A Pentagon official confirming that after the announcement, the withdrawal was coming in 30 days. But now
we are pulling back in Syria. We're going to be removing our troops. I never said we're doing it that quickly, but we're decimating ISIS.
National Security Advisor John Bolton in Israel with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu contradicting the president's original announcement. He said U.S. troops won't pull out until Kurdish allies are protected, Iranian forces leave Syria, ISIS is finally and completely defeated.
We'll be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated and is not able to revive itself and become a threat again.
Bolton's comments mark the first public confirmation that the drawdown has been slowed. The president has faced widespread criticism from allies and the resignations of Defense Secretary James Mattis and Brett McGurk, the special envoy for the coalition to defeat ISIS. Derek Dennis, I24 News.
To discuss, let's bring in retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Jesse Jane Duff and Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thane, you're joining us here on set. We'll start with you. The president, he wrote on Twitter today, "We will be leaving at a proper pace while at the same time continuing to fight ISIS." Do you believe President Trump when he claims that that was the plan all along?
Probably not. But, you know, remember, the Middle East, everything moves slowly, incrementally. The actors of the Middle East think in terms of centuries. They're not used to the impulsive tweet. And in the United States with President Trump, we had an impulsive tweet. And I think what you're seeing here is his people, Secretary of State Pompeo and National Security Advisor Bolton, are experienced. They understand the complexities of the Middle East, and they understand that we have a diplomatic obligation to the Israelis, a moral obligation to the Kurds, and frankly, a military obligation to ourselves to finish the job. President Obama mistakenly thought of ISIS as the JV team. They're not. And so one would hope, one would think, and certainly National Security Advisor Bolton believes, that we're not finished, and until we're finished, we shouldn't be withdrawing troops.
Jesse Jane Duff, whether you call this a flip-flop or the administration engaging in damage control, regardless, is this the right move to essentially slow things down as far as a U.S. troop withdrawal from Syria?
Well, I wouldn't call it a flip-flop. I think that the president's intentions are still the same, that we will have a withdrawal. He has not decided to state that the U.S. troops will stay there indefinitely, which was essentially how he walked into this situation. He was assured by his own national security team that they only needed about 6 more months, and that was last year. And he realized that nothing had changed. So I believe that he is going to move forward with the withdrawal. I don't think this is a flip-flop, but he's going to do it at a more strategic pace based upon the information that he has. One, we do not want to have our allies, such as the Syrian Defense Forces that are largely supported by YPG, which are the Kurds, to be in harm's way. Erdogan has made it very clear that they're a terrorist organization, spin-off of the PKK, but essentially Erdogan has no interest in salvaging the Kurds. He may go after ISIS, but he will not work with Kurds. So we are sending our secretary over there to ensure that we do have a relationship with Erdogan. Bolton is going over there, I should say. The national security team is ensuring that Erdogan understands that in order to do business with the United States, you do not affect our allies if you want to remain one of our allies. And this is a NATO force that we have to be aligned with and in the same steps moving forward.
Thane, before we ask you about the Kurds, I want to touch on something you said before, getting the job done on ISIS. Is defeating ISIS completely really a U.S. interest? Because if I'm trying to read between the lines of what President Trump has been saying, ISIS, they're Sunnis. Their presence in Syria, by part, they're also countering Iran. They're countering President Assad's forces. And President Trump, he said before the cabinet meeting, we are killing ISIS for Iran. So is he trying to tell us between the lines that completing ISIS defeat is not really the goal here, or shouldn't be?
Well, that is a complicated chess play that you're describing, because morally, again, speaking from a human rights perspective, ISIS is on YouTube beheading people. And that really should be as a liberal society, that should be, as a human rights agenda, something that we should be mostly concerned about. There's no doubt that in the Middle East, you know, there are not that many good actors. And so because there are many good actors, you want to have them offsetting each other. And yes, in some ways, ISIS and Iran play off of each other, but they're both menaces, and they both need to be responded to.
And one of the good actors, at least as far as the United States is concerned, is the Kurds.
Absolutely.
How do we protect the Kurds if we don't have any troops in Syria?
David, you know, this is the real moral outrage. You know, the one people that have really been most consistently fighting the ISIS, especially in Iraq, have been the Peshmerga, the Kurds. And so we've always had a moral obligation to them, because they've been doing the very thing that President Trump has said, which is what the people of the Middle East should be fighting their own battles. And frankly, the Kurds are the only ones that are doing it. So how could we leave them in a position with their mortal enemy, the Turkey, who have no other interest other than to continue to oppress the Kurds and to slaughter them?
Jesse, President Trump last week, he sort of downplayed, I think, the alliance with the Kurds. He said that the Kurds are selling oil to Assad, selling oil to Iran. And he also said they fight better when we fight with them, sending F-18s in front of them. Why do you think the president mentioned that?
Well, I can't read the president's mind. I do know that the relationship with the Kurds is critical in the U.S., in the Middle East, that in the efforts that we have going on right now. For example, ISIS did get into Iraq. It's not just about Iran. ISIS did threaten the very interests we have in Iraq, where we still do have troops based. I don't think that we'd be abandoning the Kurds by withdrawing our troops on a steady, slow basis, ensuring that Erdogan does not attack them. That's the #1 threat. And we still have forces in Iraq that can come to their assistance. We do have forces there that the president is not withdrawing. Keep in mind, our forces in Syria are there in an advisory role. They are not supposed to be in a combatant role. We have not had congressional approval to be in combat in there. And, you know, this is a very sticky situation when you're dealing with Russia, when you're dealing with Assad, and when you're dealing with Iran, all mixing into the plate along with Erdogan. The only people that have invested interest in protecting the Kurds would be the U.S. and Israel. So we want to ensure that the Kurds have protection. We may be able to get that support from some of our UAE partners.
Jesse Jane Duff, retired Marine Gunnery Sergeant, and Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum. Thank you both so much for coming in. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
When we come back, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is lashing out at a domestic criminal investigation that seems to be targeting him. He says he wants to face his corruption accusers publicly.
And the United States advances in the South China Sea as trade talks get underway. Those stories and much more ahead.